Hey folks, in this video we're going to build out a custom specular surface where you'll be able to modify the specular highlight to whatever color you want. In this case we're going to build out a rainbow surface, and we're going to also talk about some important surface properties in the process. So let's jump in and get started. Alright, we're in Unreal and this is the surface that we are going to build. Now as I move the camera, you get to see that distinctive rainbow pattern that shows up. Now, I mistakenly called this a refractive pattern. Now, there is some refraction involved, but technically this is thin film interference that's causing this rainbow pattern. And we'll talk about that. A little bit also about the anisotropy that's going on here. Now, anisotropy is a property by which you have aligned deformations in the surface. So things like hair, feathers, and also in this case a lathed surface, CD-ROM, where all the grooves are aligned. Now what that can cause is it can cause the specular highlight to get stretched along that similar deformed surface, as opposed to an isotropic surface where when you rotate the object you will have a uniform specular highlight. So let's build this out. I created a material already, and I'm going to hold down the S key and create a metal, and that can be set to 1 because it is going to be metal. Well, I'm going to hit Control D. We'll call this the anisotropy and plug that in, and then finally we'll just hold down S again, and this will be rough, and that can just be set to something like 0.1 as a start. Now we can then start with just a base color. Hold down the V key if we want to make this color or tint, and we can keep it something pretty white and plug that in. Then we can plug in our surface normal. Now I already created the maps for that, so under my textures we can grab this groove texture that I created. You can create this in something like Photoshop or Substance Painter or whatever. So I've got that selected, and hold down the T key and click, and that should select it. Now this, if I just plug this right in, you'll see the surface is a little bit too grooved for my liking, so we can flatten that out a little bit. And I'm going to plug this into the flatten normal, so I'm going to hold down T and plug that in, and we can flatten that to our heart's content. Probably the grooves are really thin, so you could probably even go like 0.8 or 0.9. All right, now if we want to, we can also create a duplication of this surface, so sometimes you can just quickly do that. I'm going to hold down the U, we'll dial that into 1 to start, and then we'll just duplicate that, and this will be the V. And then we can append these together and then multiply that times. So I'm going to hold down the U key and create a texture coordinate index and the M key and multiply those together. And we will just plug this in. And then we can dial these up if we want. So something like 3 and 3. And then we can reuse this when we get to the rainbow surface. Now let's do that part, and that's the main part of this tutorial, which is this custom specular reflection. So in order to get the custom specular reflection started, we need a pixel normal, and we are going to do a custom reflection vector with a camera vector, and that combines with a custom reflection vector. There we go. Put those together, and then we will max. Now we're going to be maxing from 0 to this vector that we're going to be dialing into, and then we're going to get the dot of that. Now the dot is the product of two vectors. Now what we're going to do is we'll take a, I'm going to hold down the 3 key and just create just a base white material. We do a component mask, and this can be RGB, and we'll just pipe that into a normal. So that keeps it between 0 and 1, and that allows us to get a correct dot product between these informations. I liked Matt Weidstein's video on dot product because it explains, you know, as you move away, you get a value between these two, the two vectors that goes between 0 and 1, or 1 when they're completely aligned, and then as it pivots 90 degrees, you get lower. You can get negative. So the other thing, well, we can put the saturate in there, and then we can times that times the power, which will give us the ability to dial in our own custom exponent. So this can be like spec power or something like that. We can put in a good number for that. Let's just start with 10. And now I'm going to plug this information. Now that's going into the emissive color, but in order to make this actually have the rainbow effect that we're looking for, we're going to have to multiply that. So let's do that. So we can take this information that we have here and duplicate it and bring this down. And then I've also got a gradient that I built in Photoshop. I'll just put a link in if you want this gradient, if you want to grab it. So just look in the links below, and then we'll hold down the T key, grab that, put that into the texture, and then we can multiply that. So we can hold down the M key, and we will just take that. We could also multiply it again if we want to add an additional level of control, so like brightness. So that will give us an additional level of control on top of everything. So let's just plug that into the emissive color. So now we should have, well, this is set to 0, so we can dial in the amount that we want. You can start to see that rainbow showing up. All right, awesome. And looking at this with a different surface, you get to see the entire pattern. So you can specify with this how many times you want this tiled in for the U and the V, just to keep it simple. That's what we've got going there. All right, that pretty much wraps everything up. We can see what this looks like on this surface. Let me double check that we've got our anisotropy set to 1. That's key. And the other thing I guess I would just talk about in terms of getting this surface correct. So I'm going to hit Control E to open up this object, and then just quickly look at the UVs also. So the UVs are just wrapping around the object, as opposed to having, you could probably have the object where you have the UVs set up so that you could have the top side have an image, and then the bottom side, if you did something where it would wrap around. But just to keep it simple, it's metal on both sides. One bonus effect, since you've made it all the way through, it's a look that you can create that's similar to a Fresnel, where right now the specular highlight is coming in, but if you invert that, it pushes the reflection all the way to the outside. So let me just show that. So I'm going to disconnect it holding Alt and clicking. We'll plug this into B, hitting apply. And now take a look at this. It almost creates an edge-based effect. And on a flat surface like this CD, you would notice it more on a glancing angle from the rear. It could be a really nice visual effect. So let me switch that back. So that'll wrap things up. If you liked the video, give it a like. and subscribe for more weekly Unreal content.